Welcome to Faith and Law. I'm Brad Dacus, president and founder of the Pacific Justice Institute. On today's show, we're going to be interviewing a scientist who is an expert on understanding how we got here. Dr. James Tour, who is a former professor at Rice University, a very high-end science university. I went to Texas A&M undergrad, so I remember all the really super smart people. They went to Rice, and those of us who liked School of Business and watched big football games went to A&M. So I'm so glad to have you on the program, Dr. Tour. You're a scientist. You've been involved in material science and nanotechnology. You've done a lot of origin of life research, and in terms of the assumptions, you have a keen understanding of the proper role of faith and science. So this is going to be a real interesting conversation. But before we get into that, I want to first up front talk about the ministry and organization that you're a part of called Jesus and Science. Many people have a hard time seeing those two fit together sometimes, but you don't, do you?
No, that's why I chose the name. I intentionally put Jesus next to science, and get people wondering. That was intentional because I love Jesus more than anything in the world. He is the best in every way. And I love science. I love Jesus a lot more than I love science, but I love them both. And that's why I put them together. And so what we do is we talk about science concepts and we talk about the Lord, and we glorify our Lord.
Yeah, that's great. So you don't separate them. You actually show how they're complementary, how God and science work together, and specifically Jesus. And so I think that's real interesting because so many people have a hard time seeing those two together. So I think that's a great name for your organization. Real quickly, how did you become a believer? Were you raised in a Christian family? What's your story briefly?
Briefly, I come from a secular Jewish home, born in New York City, raised just north of the city. I came to faith at the age of 18 through the Navigators Campus Ministry when I was in college freshman, and I got super excited about the Lord. I'd say a year or so after that, year and a half after that, when I started going to a local church with some people that were very excited about the Lord. It was actually Asian Indian believers, and I was greatly challenged to press on with the Lord, and evangelism became a very big and important part of my life, and that's where I am.
Yeah, and you were a science undergrad, I assume, science major, because you got your PhD in is it nanotechnology?
No, chemistry.
In chemistry.
Major, yeah, I studied chemistry from the age of 18 in college. I did chemistry and always taking chemistry. I'm a synthetic organic chemist, and that's what my PhD is in. That's what my postdoc is in, synthetic organic and organometallic chemistry. When I started my independent career, I moved more toward the materials side, and I was doing nanotechnology before people used the word nanotechnology very much. So I've been around a long time.
Yeah, and nanotechnology is the study of real teeny tiny particles, like smaller than an atom, smaller than an electron.
An atom. So nanotechnology is 1 to 100 nanometers in any one of its dimensions. So there are many small molecules that are smaller than 1 nanometer, and but if you put about 10 molecules in a string, then you're hitting the 1 nanometer region. So it's in this size domain between molecules and say electronic devices on your computer chip. It's in that meso-size domain.
Gotcha, and that's what it's used for in a practical way in terms of science and chips. So needless to say, I can say you're a scientist. I think that's pretty safe. Based on your background and education.
I'm a chemist, so chemistry is under the banner of science. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Well, so you went in. How'd you get involved in the actual issues of? I mean, you became a Christian. You're excited about the Lord. you love evangelism. How did you get into the science aspect of Christianity? How did you reconcile those? What got you, thirsty for that kind of thought and information?
Well, I never had any doubts about the Bible being accurate and true. I love the scriptures, and so when I would hear things, when scientists would say things that were clearly contrary to what the Bible teaches, I would just kind of dismiss that in my mind. It didn't make any sense to me, and I would try to see what is your evidence for saying these sorts of things, and then their evidence was quite tenuous, and so I never really had this conflict between what professors said and what the Bible said, and to this day I don't see the conflict, and so I never had that struggle that many people have had.
Okay. So I remember when I was in third grade and I was a new believer, and Mrs. Kurtz taught about evolution and how we all came from a blob, and it just, over time, little tiny bit by tiny bit, we have human beings. And, I thought I rejected it because it was not what the Word of God says. So I told all the kids in the class, Mrs. Kurtz is a tool of Satan, and what she's saying is from the devil, and don't listen or believe anything she says. That's how I dealt with it, because I didn't have any information. I was in third grade. I just knew this doesn't agree with the Bible. How did you reconcile science? So did you just sort of ignore that which you said sort of disagree with the Bible, or did you get into challenging it? And what aspects of, say, evolution specifically did you find were challengeable based on what you were receiving by academia?
Well, I'd certainly seen bits of evolution when I was in high school. I didn't, my mind was on actually women. It wasn't so much on the evolution. So I really didn't think much about it. When I got to college, I studied chemistry. And then when I started studying organic chemistry, the last few chapters will speak on the last few chapters of the undergraduate textbook speak on the chemistry of living systems, and that's all accurate. I mean, there's no problems in there. And as chemists, I never went to a chemistry class where people really started, expounding on evolutionary things. I wasn't big on biology. I was taking mostly chemistry classes, but it happened. I would see students give seminars, and this whole area of processes that they would say, somebody would ask them, how did that come about? And they would say evolutionarily. And then all the audience would accept that, which I thought was a really stupid way to explain how something came about, to use one word and everybody just starts nodding their head. So it never made sense to me. I didn't know what it meant when somebody said evolutionarily. I mean, but I wasn't the type that would stand up and say, go on, tell me what you mean. And so it was the type of chemistry that I did. I've done a lot of medicinally related chemistry. I mean, a lot of my career was making natural products to work in pharmaceutical industry. I've started 3 pharmaceutical companies. I know a lot about that, but I've done a lot on the material science side. I've started a lot of materials companies, electronics companies. So I know how to do that type of thing. But it wasn't even until about 2016, so here I am in my 50s. And I was invited to a meeting, and it was a meeting of I could say nonconformists. So there's a very wealthy man, and he invites about 30 or 40 nonconformists from all different fields. They could be journalists, they could be scientists, they could be politicians, but people that don't conform. And they viewed me in that group because I had signed a statement in 2000. 2000, there was a statement going around saying it was sent to me in an email, and it was sent by, I think it was the Discovery Institute, something I had never even heard of, but it said, could you agree to this statement? And the statement was, I'm paraphrasing it, but it is, we feel that it said that natural selection and mutation and natural selection are insufficient to account for the biological life. Therefore, further research is warranted. That's it. It said that so natural selection and random mutation were insufficient, so further research was warranted. It said, could you agree to this? I said, sure. Boom. That was it. Just one word in the email reply. Well, that then became the touchstone about 5 years later in the Dover trial. And then my name was in the New York Times for having signed a statement that was used in the Dover trial. And I didn't even remember signing that thing. So it was just a quick email. But when I went back and I looked at the statement, I thought, I'm okay with that. Yeah, I don't think random mutation and natural selection can account for the diversity of life. As we see it, further research is warranted. What scientist would say further research is not warranted? We never say that, or else we don't get funding. Always. Further research is warranted, but in this one, they didn't want any further research to be warranted. They're arguing further research is not warranted, as if they've got the thing nailed down. I think, what are you, crazy? You got this thing nailed down. So because I had signed that statement, and a few people had asked me, and I said, yeah, I'm proud I signed that statement. I didn't really think much about it at the time, but when I think about it, it's much more vivid. And then what happened was, the National Academy of Science, so the way the National Academy of Science works, the way you get in, your colleagues elect you into the National Academy of Science. And so I went to my colleagues. I said, isn't it about time that these things, and my colleagues, one was a Nobel Prize winner, another was already, they were both in the National Academy. One of them was a Nobel Prize winner. And the two of them were sitting in my office, and they said, we're not going to put you up for the National Academy. I said, why not? And I said, I've done as much as anybody getting in. And the Nobel Prize winner said to me, no, Jim, you've done twice as much as anybody getting into the National Academy. And that was in 2000. That was in 2006.
Okay, well then why weren't they able to nominate you? It seems like it makes total sense.
I'm getting to that. And they said, because you signed that statement. I said, what statement? They said that statement that further research is warranted because we hold that random mutation and natural selection is insufficient. I said, that statement? I said, what part of that statement do you not like? They couldn't even remember the statement. So I said, okay, you guys go out, go read that statement, we'll get back together. We got back together. They said, well, it was a very carefully crafted statement. I said, well, duh, what do you think? It's going to be careful. If you're going to ask people to sign it, it's going to be carefully crafted. I said, but with what of that do you disagree? They said, well, it was used to support teaching creationism in schools. I said, well, what people used it for has nothing to do with me. I signed the statement, but they said they would never put me up. And that's when I really got lit up for that. And so I thought, if that's what they're going to do, and the one guy said, I'll never put you forward. The other guy said, well, I'll think about it, but it's unlikely. And so that's when I started really coming out and pushing this thing. So it was a reaction to being shunned by the National Academy of Science, not by the Academy itself, but by people within it, that we're not going to put you forward. It had nothing to do with the fact that I had done twice as much as anybody else getting in. So yeah, that was the origin. That was a long answer to a short question. Sorry about that.
Well, no, I'm really glad you gave that answer, because I think people need to understand what people like you go through when we have a very closed-minded, prejudicial, atmosphere in the area of something that we expect to be very objective, which is science. Apparently, science is not objective, is it?
It's not very objective. So people assume it's objective, but it's not really.
Okay, so let's talk about evolution. Why would someone, what are some of the flaws and problems that someone would have with saying, nope, I believe in or I believe in Darwinian evolution. It makes total sense. What are some of the holes in their thinking? What are some of the assumptions they have that are not yet founded or could be founded by science?
Yeah, so if anybody said that it made total sense to them, it means that they're a rookie. I mean, the sophisticated are very careful about saying something like that, to say it makes total sense. So when somebody says that, I already know that I'm working with somebody that really doesn't understand these things. There are so many unknowns. There are system levels between what happens in a cell. A cell used to be just a bunch of protoplasm. And then as we got more and more knowledge of the cell, it is so utterly sophisticated. Molecules don't normally move into arrangements like this. So cellular structure is highly ordered. So the entropy is very low. It's very low entropy, meaning it's highly ordered, but it's extremely high energy. And so to have a high energy system with very low entropy, it's very rare. It's not unheard of. So for example, a tornado would be something that's very high energy, but low entropy, meaning that it is an ordered system of very high energy. But there's not many things like that, and that's what every cell is, but much, much more sophisticated than a tornado. So you have these properties, so you have to think about this sort of thing. And then how do you go from one organism to another? What does it take to convert a whale into a cow? How many changes does it take in a genome to do that? An enormous number of changes. And if you make one base pair change, that can be corrected. When you get two base pair changes, it is very hard for this thing to proceed. And you have to get thousands upon thousands. And you need to also you need to push things such that you have many things in the same place at the same time for these changes to be occurring. There is so much difficulty when you think of the chemical details needed within an evolutionary process. But what happens is biologists, they fly over things at 30,000 feet. And they look down and they'll just talk about these gross changes. We're not allowed to do that as chemists. When you get down into this, instead of flying over New York City at 30,000 feet and looking down, when you get down into that city and you see all the traffic lights that have to be coordinated, all the plumbing that there is under the cities, under the streets, all the sewage and the fresh water and the drainage systems, and you see all the coordination, you're like, my goodness, how does this happen in a cell, which is like a factory, which has all of these microtubules going and transporting information from point A to point B, and then those tubules just going away, or else the cell would get too stiff, and they reconstructed other places. It's so sophisticated. So the problem is that biologists push this stuff because they're looking at a level that's very hard to think about. When you get down to the chemistry, that's where they start getting scared. And I will question them at the chemical level, and they have no answers. They just avoid me. They have no answers. So this is the problem. So when somebody says to me, I'm totally happy with evolution, I thought it's not even worth engaging with them because they're so clueless on this.
Now, when I was young, at the time, this is back in the 70s, they said, I remember them saying there's about 50,000 missing links out there, but we know over time, bit by bit, we're going to be resolving all these missing links and show how the evolutionary process was very gradual and how it all came about very, very gradually. And then I understand, then they said, yeah, you know what? We've come to the conclusion that all these missing links are going to stay missing because what actually happened is it made a leap. Instead of just one or two genetic mutations, it took multiple ones. They just sort of leaped from this animal species up to this animal. It seems that that's taking more faith than before to believe that you didn't just have one or two positive mutations, but you had multiples happening at the same time that had to be positive and also had to be sufficient to be able to reproduce with the opposite, gender of that species. Is that sort of where you're coming from?
Well, the Cambrian explosion is certainly something that's harder to explain. How do you go from just a few simple things to this huge diversity of organisms that filled the Earth, and over a very short amount of time? So this whole idea of Darwinian gradual changes, that's gone away. And that went away in the 1970s with punctuated equilibrium, where you go from just a few organisms to a massive number, and they said changes occur very rapidly over short amounts of time. So this whole idea that people were teaching prior to the 1980s, there were small changes over time. That has all gone away, and so they don't even talk about random mutation and natural selection being what are the dominant views. What biologists will revert to now is they'll talk about the very small changes that happen between a parent and their offspring. This neutral drift, it's called, this genetic neutral drift, and they'll talk about this common ancestor approach. So universal common descent and neutral drift. Even if I give you a single cell, to think about how that goes to the diversity of multicellular organisms and to the diversity of things that we see today, it is very hard as soon as you start getting to the molecular level. So as a chemist, that's where I look, right at the molecular level. And there's just so much I don't understand. And so you would think that one of my colleagues here would just put their arm on my shoulder and say, "Hey, Jim, let's go to the faculty club over lunch. I'll explain this to you." They don't. Nobody ever does. They don't do it.
Why?
And did you say why?
Yeah, why?
Because they can't. Because they can't. Because they can't explain to James Tour at the molecular level how any of this can occur. So they don't go near me in a conversation like this. So what does that tell you? It tells you they don't know. They just don't know. So when they blow this stuff out that they're so confident on this and this and this and this happened, they don't do that in my presence because they haven't the explanation. And as soon as I start asking them, it withers very quickly at the edges. It just starts falling apart.
Yeah. It seems that what you're showing is that it's not reasonable for someone to believe in a pure secularist evolutionary theory. There's just too much faith necessary to go down that road, as opposed to accepting that there is the necessity of intelligent design, something with incredible power, incredible knowledge that help basically orchestrated human life and life in general. Is that right?
Well, I wouldn't put it that way myself. I don't promote intelligent design in the sense that, though I'm sympathetic to it, that I don't know what the future holds. So if you had asked a man or a woman 500 years ago, will we ever have space flight, land people on the moon, they'll walk around and they'll fly back, they would have thought, what are you talking about? We don't even know how to fly, let alone space flight, let alone going to the moon. But times change. People figure things out. So I can't say that we will never know how life came about. I can't say that. All I say is that today we don't know, and we are nowhere close to knowing. So how can I know what we're going to find tomorrow? Well, I know, because what happens is you can track our progress toward a certain target. And what you do is you say, okay, here's where we are. Here is the target of how life originated. And so I move a nanometer closer to my target because I found something. But in the same amount of time, my target has moved 100 miles away. This keeps happening. The more we learn about the complexity of biological systems, the harder it is to figure out how we're going to get there, because it is moving away from us. And that's how we track scientific progress. You know when you're going to hit on something because you get closer and closer and closer to this answer, but we're getting further and further away. That's how I know we're nowhere close. It's not going to happen next year. It's not going to happen in 10 years. Maybe in 500 years it'll happen. Maybe in 100 or 500 years, but I doubt 100. But that's how you track scientific progress. That is why I can say it is not going to happen anytime soon. But as a scientist, I can't say that we would never know. So I wouldn't put it quite in the terms.
Gotcha. Gotcha. But the bottom line is you're saying basically the more we learn, the more complex it becomes and the more questions that are opened up, not the fewer questions. Okay. And that makes total that. Yeah, I think I talked to one scientist who once said that over the last 20 years, I want to see what your thoughts on this are, that there's more understanding of the complexity and intricacy of the universe, the formation of the universe, of Earth, of life, that it actually requires more faith to believe that God doesn't exist today than 20 years ago. In other words, science has become more validating towards the necessity of the existence of God, not less validating. What say you?
That is true. Science is screaming out that our traditional hypotheses are probably wrong. It's not just whispering, it is screaming out that the traditional hypotheses are probably wrong. And that screaming is getting louder every year because we are seeing these complexities. When we see the fine-tuning of the universe and how fine-tuned it is, and all these people that talk about fine-tuning of the universe, for some reason they always leave out chemistry. I mean, if you just look at the strength of the hydrogen bond, if that's off by a fraction of percent, there's no life. It's not going to happen. I mean, so there's fine-tuning everywhere you look in the universe. The constants around the objects that you're looking are fine-tuned for us to have life. So it's screaming these things out. You didn't know this 30 years ago. You didn't know this certainly 50 years ago. You didn't know a lot about these things. And so, yes, science itself is further validating that there's a lot more here that we don't know.
Yeah, I've heard a lot from in terms of biology and also in terms of astronomy, validating the existence of a creator. But you're sort of a different angle. I'll be honest, as far as chemistry, this is something I haven't done much reading about. You talk about the hydrogen bond, for example. This is the first time I've ever heard of this. Do you have a book on this, or something that people like myself who really get into this apologetics topic could read and learn from what you're talking about in terms of science and specifically chemistry?
Yeah, I've written several articles on this, and I've written book chapters on this, but I haven't sat down to read a book to write a book on it. But I've written chapters in books, and I can certainly refer you. I've written several things for the journal called Inference, and that's online. And if you just Googled James Tour Inference, you'd have access to several articles that I've written on this sort of thing. But it's truly amazing when you think of it at the chemical level. Let me give you an example that you've probably never thought about, but is really remarkable. Is that, for example, you are not the same person that you were when we started this conversation 30 minutes ago. You're a different person. And what do I mean by that? So, for example, every hydrogen bond, the thing that you say you've never heard of, every hydrogen bond in your body has changed. There's a new hydrogen atom there. It's not the original one there was 30 minutes ago. Every one of them has changed. Every one of those changes 1,000 times a second, every one of those hydrogen bonds. And when they change, they can come in such that the electron is spin up or spin down. Now, functionally, they're going to be similar, but they are chemically different. Every molecule in your body. One guy challenged me this. He says, "Oh, well, our teeth, they stay the same." I said, "No, they don't. Just look it up." Constantly, our teeth undergo dissolution and reprecipitation. And so this is what's happening. Every molecule in our body, there's a hydrogen bond change. And so what happens is we are constantly changing at the molecular level. We are constantly changing. you will say, well, the molecule's equivalent. Yeah, it's equivalent, but it's not the same. The atom changes. It's not the same. And this is why, for example, the resurrection, it sounds perfectly good to me. People will say, how is Jesus ever going to resurrect our body if it's totally decomposed? Well, he made it once before and he can make it again. You say, well, it's not the same body. I say, no, Is your body the same as it was 30 minutes ago? No, your body's not the same as it was 30 minutes ago. Every one of those molecules has had atom changes in it 1,000 times a second. So in chemistry, I mean, all of this begins to make sense, and it's a much happier life when you think of it at the chemical level.
Yeah, this is new to me, so I find this really interesting. And do you know? Let's these are interesting thoughts. You already sort of alluded to the fact that some out there, I guess, are not very friendly to Christian scientists like yourself, who don't just blindly believe in Darwinian or whatever kind of what the latest evolutionary theory is, absent a creator. Do you know of any other scientists, Christian scientists, who have taken pushback, who've been suffered or been discriminated against in the sphere of intellectual thought in science? Is this something that's pretty common, or do most scientists, most of them pretty open to new thoughts and ideas, including that which might possibly point to the existence of God?
Well, let me just say that because I didn't get into the National Academy of Science, 20 years later, I got into the National Academy of Engineering. So the engineers were a little more open to me. But I wouldn't really call that persecution. The Bible says, it says in Hebrews, you haven't yet suffered to the point of shedding blood. So that seems like that is the threshold Bible level for persecution compared to what my brothers and sisters around the world are going through in places like Pakistan. I mean, what I go through is just kindergarten. So I can't say that I've really been persecuted in that sense. Yeah, I haven't gotten some grant money and things like that, but that's not Bible level. But there are other scientists who have spoken up, who have gotten pushback. There are a few scientists that speak up quite boldly. Now, let me give you my thoughts on this. My thoughts on this is, if you're in academia and you speak up a little bit about the Lord, you'll get a lot of people pushing back at you. But if you speak up a lot about the Lord, they leave you alone. They don't want to get you started. And so the number of people that speak a lot about the Lord is very small. And we see this type of thing even in the scriptures. In John chapter 12, it says, many even of the rulers believed upon him, meaning Jesus, but they were not confessing him for fear of the Pharisees, that they would be put out of the synagogue. So that's a pretty big thing, to be put out of the synagogue. You have no more interaction with your community. It's not like going across the street to the other church. It's a big deal. But the next verse says this, because they loved the approval of men more than the approval of God. So it seems like the scriptures have very little patience for people who do not speak up, who are afraid to speak up because they might undergo some sort of persecution, being put out of the synagogue. It didn't even have mercy on them for being put out of the synagogue. It just said because they love the approval of men more than the approval of God. So I think that as believers, if we don't speak up, it is a sad, sad day for us. So when people say, well, I got to get tenure first, you lie. What'll happen is you'll get tenure and then you'll say, well, I really have to wait till I get promoted to full professor, then I'll speak up. And then you get promoted to full professor and you'll be like, well, I've never spoken up, so it would be kind of weird for me to speak up now. And so before you know it, they're at retirement. And that's what happens to people, and they regret never having spoken up. We must speak up. I spoke up as an assistant professor, and I'll tell you there was so much blessing in that. Yeah, people said things and people hurt my feelings, but I had to get over it and I went on. And it turned out I got tenure after 3 years. I was a full professor after 4, a chaired professor after 5. My career took off because the Bible says that the eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the entire earth to strongly support those whose heart is completely his. Yes, things happen. Things happen in careers. But Jesus said it. He says, if they hate you, they hated me first. Blessed are you. He said, blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely on account of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Woe to you if all men speak well of you, for so they spoke of the false prophets.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can assure you, myself and our many attorneys on our staff relate with very closely with what you've said, because our attorneys, they face pushback. Some of them, when they work for Pacific Justice Institute, that's going to shut the door potentially, and potential jobs in the future with some major law firms that may not like what we do, religious freedom, parents' rights, the sanctity of human life. But they make a choice. They say, am I going to be pleasers of men or pleasers of God? I'm going to use what God's given me. I'm going to be faithful with the truth. And I sort of see that same connection. I think that plays out in other areas as well, but especially in the area of science. I can tell you right now, Dr. Tour, that my heart goes out to you and the others who do have the boldness to speak out. We at Pacific Justice Institute, we've defended professors before without charge who do suffer pushback, who are fired because of their beliefs. There was one professor I know we represented who was fired because of similar beliefs that he has, similar to yours. And if there's any scientist out there, anywhere, that has been discriminated against, I want them to contact us at Pacific Justice Institute, because we represent them without charge. We have over 130 cases in active litigation, coast to coast. We have 37 offices, coast to coast. We're here to serve you. We're here to serve people like you in your profession that are being faithful with truth, but are suffering from it and unnecessarily being discriminated against. So hats off to you in that regard. Why is intelligence alone not enough, though, to lead someone to the truth? Because there's many people out there who are very intellectual, and I like to think, well, we just show them all the evidence of the existence of God, and there, it's all done. Why is that not sufficient for someone to become a Christian?
Oh, for someone to become a Christian. Okay. So let me first say, I appreciate what your organization does. When you say that you're defending these professors free of charge, I mean, that is amazing. That is very kind of you. And I know that you probably have a lot of lawyers that are doing all of this pro bono. And thank you for doing that, because there are things that arise that I think what keeps administrations in check is people like you, that they're afraid of a lawsuit. And so it's going to keep them in check. So that continues to have to be there. And thankfully, I've never had to threaten a lawsuit against my administration. But there are times that we've had intense discussions, and that's not when I was here at Rice. That was at a former institution. Rice has been very supportive, but I appreciate what you do. Why isn't intelligence alone enough to bring somebody to the faith? Well, I think the Bible's pretty clear on that. I mean, part of it might depend on your theology. The Bible does speak about the elect. Some Bibles call it the chosen, and there are times when God is working upon one's heart. And I'll tell you, intelligence alone doesn't do it. And in fact, intelligence can sometimes make somebody feel so proud, like they've got this thing. It can even fight against it to make them feel that they understand all of these things.
Hi, I'm Brad Dacus, founder and president of Pacific Justice Institute. I want to personally invite you to join PJI for our annual Celebration of Justice Gala on October 17th at the JW Marriott in Anaheim, California. Now, this special evening brings together supporters from across the country to celebrate the legal victories that God has made possible through PJI's work defending faith, family, and freedom. At the Celebration of Justice, you're going to hear inspiring stories from the front lines and enjoy an unforgettable program featuring keynote speaker Emily Campagno from Fox News and co-host of Outnumbered. We'll also have special guests Ray Comfort of Living Waters and, of course, our MC, Todd Starnes. Don't miss this incredible night of inspiration, fellowship, and impact. Purchase your tickets today at celebrationofjustice.org. That's celebrationofjustice.org. God bless, and I can't wait to see you there.
What I do, I love to share my faith. If I go a week without leading somebody to the Lord in a one-on-one conversation, it is a wasted week for me. So I take this stuff really seriously. So I don't come with a lot of heady information. I go right at the heart. Most people that I know who have come to the faith in Jesus Christ, they've come through the heart and not the head. Now, there are some people who may look into things and they can say, well, academically, I looked at this and I was really convinced. But I would think, I don't know for sure, but I would think even those people, there was something stirring in their hearts as well. And the words of Jesus have enormous power. So when I share with people, I will show them scripture verses. I will quote to them scripture verses because the word of God has enormous power. These are God's spoken words. And it has a way of arresting a man, of taking them and stopping them in their tracks. And they are hit by these things. And I've even said to world leaders, one-on-one conversations, I say, you know what the most important thing in life is? They say, what's that? I say, it's the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ. And they just go silent. They move back. And this is exactly what the scriptures say will happen. Even to kings, this will happen to them. The resurrection of Jesus Christ is the foundation of our faith. And I go right at the resurrection. I give them evidence for the resurrection, evidence upon evidence for the resurrection. But ultimately, after watching hundreds, I'm talking hundreds of people in one-on-one conversations come to the Lord, I'm convinced that the truth of the resurrection was written upon their heart by God. Something was written already there. Something happened, because I don't think Jim Tour in 15 minutes can give a person enough evidence just through a conversation to go from not believing in a physical resurrection to believing in a physical resurrection, had the God of heaven and earth also not touched the heart at the same time. Right. And so when I'm speaking to people, I am intent in prayer, in my own mind, in prayer. God, open them up. Lord, open them up. And boom, God does that. God has that power. So I never go right at a person's head. I give evidence. And so I use apologetics in that way, but I use the scriptures also to go right in there. And that's why Paul said, listen, I didn't come to baptize, and I didn't come with any cleverness. He says, lest it makes the cross of Christ void. Right. But he came with the gospel. And I use the gospel. I use the simple age-old gospel, the same thing that Charles Spurgeon used, the same thing that George Whitefield used. That's what I use. I use the gospel of Jesus Christ, that he has risen from the dead. And this is how I see the intellectuals open all the time. I lead PhDs to the Lord all the time. PhDs predominantly in science and engineering. And This is using the simple gospel message.
So you use the evidence to support Jesus risen from the dead as a tool to open the door for the real issue, which is the heart, is really their willingness to believe and surrender their lives in humility to someone greater than themselves. So it's not like the end game in terms of intellect and evidence and apologetics. That's a tool to open the door to get to the real issue, which is, are they willing to use the gift of faith to surrender their lives to the Lord and receive Christ as their Lord and Savior?
Absolutely. And this is what you see with Paul. I mean, you couldn't have a greater intellect than Paul, trained under Gamaliel. I mean, he knew all the rabbinic arguments. And then Jesus appears to him on the road. Yeah. And the man is blinded. the man is blinded, and he hears God's voice, and something happens. And I look for the heart change. I look for that. And all of these PhDs, it really doesn't impress me that much, because I know that all scientists, they have the same fears as everybody else, and they have the same self-esteem problems, and they have to allay their fears, and they may put something that's strong on the outside, but on the inside, they're just like the rest of us.
Yeah. So, you think pride actually is a? I mean, you think a lot of, like you said, a lot of professors they're very proud, at least on the outside. Do you think that that plays a role in keeping them from being willing to acknowledge the truth that God exists? Because if God exists, then that inherently would humble them to recognize that there's someone or something much more powerful, much more intelligent than them. I've heard that said, that sometimes the pride of intellectualism that comes with being a professor and recognized can actually be a major hindrance for them to have, ironically, a mind that's truly open to the truth.
No, I think that that's true. And I think what gives me a little bit more success than maybe others is because in my presence, they don't project themselves as being as proud.
Mm.
They People are aware of others' resumes in this field. We have metrics that measure something called H index that measures the impact of one's work, and I think that this is why their pride is not puffing them up so much when they're sitting with me one on one. I think this certainly helps, and this is part of what gives me a little bit more in with these people. Um, and and there are people who have told me this. They say, Jim, if you could believe this, I can too. That sounds kind of strange, but this is exactly what happened. Remember when Paul is on that island of Malta? I mean, once the head of the town gave his life to the Lord, the whole rest of the town came. And
Yeah.
once the jailer gave his life to the Lord, his whole family followed. And so when people respect somebody and that person embraces the truth of Jesus Christ, it's actually disarming to others who respect that person. And so there's several people that have told me that, and they'll say, you believe this for a reason. Rick Smalley, Nobel Prize winner, he discovered C60, Buckminster fullerene. He's credited with one of the quote unquote really launchers of nanotechnology. He was a dear friend of mine, and he used to say, Jim, how do you do this? How do you have this wife that you've been married to, one wife your whole life, and you have these children that love you, and then your research group, it seems so happy, and the students are working for you. How do you do this? This is a Nobel Prize winner, and he's asking me about this. And then he said to me, he says, I want to go to the faculty club for lunch. I want to know, what is this power behind Jesus Christ? What's going on here? So when people see that in lives of people who they respect, it has a way of opening them up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic. Real quick, I know there's some people out there wondering what your basic points would be to validate Jesus risen from the dead. Can you just give us just a few, little pieces of evidence that you often use, you reference when you're talking to people who stumble over that and have a hard time believing Jesus risen from the dead?
Yeah. So if you want to see it in detail, I recorded a video. I was speaking at Harvard a year ago, and that's on the internet. So if you just went to Dr. James Tour is my YouTube channel, Dr. James Tour, and typed in Harvard, it would come up. Now I've given a few talks at Harvard, but you'll see it's where there's an auditorium and some students there, and I talked a little bit about nanotechnology. Then I went through my normal sequence of things concerning the resurrection. And so what I do is I say I'm going to give you biblical evidence, and I show them Romans 10:9, that if you believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that he's risen from the dead, you will be saved. I said, look at this. You have to believe in your heart that he's risen from the dead. How can any educated person believe that somebody's been risen from the dead? We have no data points on this. This is not an NDE, near-death experience, where a person flatlines for a minute or 2 minutes and they're resuscitated. This is a man who was in a grave over a period of 3 days. How does that happen? How could God expect an educated person to believe such a thing? I said, we're going to look at that now. I'm going to first give you biblical evidence, and then I'm going to give you extra biblical evidence, meaning evidence outside the Bible, but from that era in time. I said, before I can give you evidence from the Bible, from the New Testament, I have got to establish for you the veracity of the New Testament. And so I will say, if you were to go into any secular university religion department and speak with the religious scholars there, almost all of them would agree to this. And most of them are not from Christian backgrounds, and most of them would say that currently they're agnostics, but they would agree to this, that there was a man named Jesus who was crucified. They would agree to this because it's not just that we have thousands of manuscripts of the New Testament from antiquity. It is that this is written in mosaics. It's written on walls. It's written on tiles on floors. It's probably the most solid fact of that period in history. Many of them would say that. Secondly, I'd say, they would all agree that Jesus's disciples said that he had risen from the dead and appeared to them, and most of them were willing to die for that assertion. So they'd agree to that. They're not saying that Jesus is risen from the dead. They're saying his disciples said that he had risen from the dead and appeared to them. And thirdly, that even unbelievers, such as Jesus's brother James, and enemies of Jesus, such as Paul, said that Jesus rose from the dead and appeared to them. They too died for that assertion. So that's what religious scholars would say. And then I show them the quote from Will Durant. I said, here is the man who's probably the greatest historian, certainly among the top 2 historians of the 20th century, Will Durant and Arnold Toynbee. Will Durant said of himself that he is an agnostic, but he is an expert historian. Expert historians read documents very differently than I read them. You could put the structure of 2 organic molecules on a piece of paper. I can look at that and in 2 seconds tell you whether those 2 molecules would react if you mix them together. I would tell you where they would react with each other and what the product would be and whether it would be fast or slow. How can I do that? Well, I'm a trained synthetic chemist. Historians can do things that we can't do ourselves. And they look at documents and they say, if every detail of 3 corroborating witnesses were exactly the same, they say you can't trust it because they were colluding. You're not going to have every detail be the same. The gist of the story is the same. I said the other thing is they look at the witnesses. Who were the witnesses? Then I show them the quote from Will Durant that he says that that the contradictions are of minutia, not substance. Those contradictions are what you expect to see. He says that in the substance, they agree, the Gospels, the canonical Gospels agree remarkably well, not just well, remarkably well. Then he talks about the higher criticism couldn't stop this. We go through and he shows how these men would not have made up this story. And then I just take them through the quote. I said, okay, now with that, let me take you through the New Testament account. And I tell them the New Testament account. Then I discuss a little bit about Tacitus, a little bit about Pliny the Younger, a little bit about Trajan, and then they're ready.
Yeah, that's great. I really want to see that. I want to watch that. Where do they go again to watch that again?
My YouTube channel, Dr. James Tour. Mm-hmm. And so in the little search box in YouTube, type Dr. James Tour space Harvard. and it'll pop up. It was a message that I gave in just about a year ago in 2025, and listen through that. The first half of the lecture, I'm talking about nanotechnology. The second half, I was leading people right through the explanation that I use, talking about the resurrection from the dead.
Okay. Now, I have to ask you this because it's just on my mind. Recently, a gentleman came out with a book on the recent, scientific archaeological evidence of Jesus. And one of the things he points to was the Shroud of Turin. And he talks about that in his book. And, from your perspective, have you looked into that at all? I mean, you can be a Christian and believe or not believe in the Shroud of Turin. That's supposedly the shroud that Jesus, the cloth that they put his body in when he was, after he was crucified and then he rose again. There's this image in the Shroud of Turin. And is there any scientific validity to that, or is that still sort of in a big kind of a question mark in your mind?
No, I've watched, I don't know, half a dozen videos on it, and I think the science is looking pretty strong. I never use the Shroud of Turin myself. I don't need it. I never use it. And since it remains in question, I don't use it. I don't use Josephus, what Josephus had to say about Jesus, because a lot of scholars say that was a later insertion, although the more recent work that's coming out of Yale University is saying, no, that's exactly what Josephus would write. But I don't use Josephus for that reason, because it is kind of suspect what some scholars disagree with that. So I don't personally use the Shroud of Turin. I'm not against using it. I think it's very interesting, but I don't personally use it.
Yeah, I know from your background, as far as from a chemistry background, I know one of the things they pointed to was that the image that's there is something that would require an enormous amount of energy and light in order to have that kind of.
From micron deep, it's very interesting how that image got there.
Yeah.
I don't know how that image could have gotten there in a typical sense. I don't know how that can be usually a laser that's going to put an image, and there were no lasers a long time ago. But if I were gonna do it, I would try to do that with a relatively low powered laser. I would try to write that image on there, and I'd love to be able to investigate that myself, because if there were a big burst of heat and it came very, very quickly, what you're going to see, if you look at the Raman spectrum, you're going to see signatures of graphene in there. And I'd love to be able to look at that myself. But I might be able to even find online the Raman spectrum, so I could probably look at it and see the signatures there. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's even a graphitic type of residue that from that burst of light. It'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, and I really respect your approach with it. With that, it's number one, it's not necessary for the Christian faith, and number two, when there is something that's still not 100% validated, we don't treat it like it's 100% validated. We treat it where it is, what the evidence is, and leave it at that. So, what advice would you give to someone who is, young as a scientist? They have a desire to maybe to go into an area of science, biology, chemistry, astronomy, and they know that as they move up through the ranks through universities, especially secular universities, they're going to get a lot of pushback. Should they keep their faith? And sort of alluded this to earlier a bit, when they're just trying to get their PhD, trying to get their foot in the door. Is it safe at any time for them to keep their faith sort of to themselves in that process, or should that really be anywhere? Should they have that kind of a thinking even in the early stages of their academics?
Well, I want to be sensitive to this. I really do. I don't want to just say you blurt out everything in every situation. I think that you want to be sensitive to this, but I think that you also have to let people know that you are a believer. And there are ways that you can do that. I keep on the corner of my desk right here a Bible that's very vividly a Bible. It says Holy Bible on it. And so that everybody who comes to my office sees that on my desk. I got a big nail here, very big nail. And I actually bought that nail in Israel. And it people say, what's that? I said, well, it just reminds me of the sacrifice that my Lord made on my behalf. And I put a scripture verse at the top of every exam. I figure if some people can quote John Lennon, I can quote John the Baptist. Um, so, so you need to let people know. That's important. But how you address people with this, I think it's wise to be sensitive to where people might be and to talk with them. What I look for is I look for signs. It's Calvinistic in that sense, that I'm looking for signs. If they ask me, like I had a guy working for me, and I try to be sensitive to people that are in my classes or working in my laboratory, because I have a tremendous amount of power over them in an academic sense, and I don't want them to feel obliged to agree with me or be pressured into this. But if they ask me, they say, hey, I was watching your YouTube videos, I never thought of it like that. That to me is a sign that there might be interest there. And then I'm more open to sharing with them. Or I might say, okay, I'd love to have this discussion with you. How about after the final, after the grades are in, you and I go for lunch and we're going to talk about this. And I set it up for them because I don't want to have that differential of power over them. But I look for signs with colleagues. I look for signs. If somebody asks me, I'm all over it. I'm saying, okay, let's go to lunch together, and I'm going to give you the gospel. If somebody happens to come to a Bible study that I'm teaching by campus here, that to me is enough of a sign. If someone comes to one of the open lunches that I have in my home, and it's well known that that's frequented by Christian students, if they show up there, that's sign enough for me. And then I'm even more into this. Yeah, I'll witness to an Uber driver or something, but the big successes come when I see even a little bit of a sign, a person asks a question, and those are the ones that I go after.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I would also advise students in college to do their homework, read the chapter ahead of time, work and apply themselves, so that it can never be said that they're sloppy about their learning and learning process. I remember once I had a psychology professor, and I was in the School of Business. We had to take psychology back then. And the professor would go off on wacky things, and I would read the chapter ahead so I knew exactly what the subject was. And I remember once he said, homosexuality is something everyone's just born with. And I remember I raised my hand. I said, but professor, doesn't it say in our own textbook, Psychology Today, on page 82 that, quote, gender identity or sexual orientation is not the result of genetics, but rather one's of the result of environmental factors and influence? And I slammed the book down and I leaned forward, and he said, yes, that is actually correct. It's not something you're born with. I said, thank you. And the class laughed. But I do think that students need to work, we need to take it double seriously, academics, to show ourselves so that we are not sloppy, we're not lazy, and yet at the same time have what you said, which is the courage and the conviction not to deny our faith, but to look for those opportunities to live our faith and share our faith as the opportunities open up. Dr. James Tour, I so appreciate our time together today. I want to encourage people to go to your website, to look at your information, to look at your organization, Jesus and Science. I love this topic. I know I'm going to be looking at it. The actual website is, once again?
So it's jesusandscience.org for that. And then there's my professional website, but go to jesusandscience.org. You'll find everything there. And my YouTube channel is all of my social media is under the handle Dr. James Tour. So you can find it under YouTube, Facebook. Instagram. It's all under Dr. James Tour, and you'll be able to find a lot of material there. And if I could just say one last thing in closing to your audience, if any of you do not believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ, so this is not for believers, this is an invitation only for unbelievers. If you do not believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ, you send me an email to tour@drjamestour.org, tour@drjamestour.org, and we'll get together one-on-one by Zoom. We'll set up a conversation, and I'll share with you why I embrace the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, fantastic. I appreciate your heart, and you keep up the great work. And I once again want to let you know, Dr. Tour and other scientists out there, that and anyone actually in the workplace, that if they're being persecuted because of their faith, or being, say, discriminated against because of their faith, may be more accurate, they should not hesitate to contact us at our website, pji.org, pji.org. We do our work completely without charge, and it is a joy to serve people like you doing the work that you're doing with the boldness and the love of Christ to make a real difference in a world where it is needed so much for such a time as this. So thank you again for being on the program. And I just want to encourage people right now that, folks, no matter how great the struggle, no matter how great the challenge, always, always keep the faith.